Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing the game between the Sharks and the Oilers, in which the Sharks managed to win 5-2. They are now 3-0 on this Western Canada road trip, and in a season series thus far against the Edmonton Oilers, they are 3-0-1. Of course, they lost 4-3 in overtime. That was of Ken Hitchcock's first game coaching the Oilers, but since then the Sharks have won the past 3 meetings by a combined score of 19-8. So pretty dominant, at least offensively, for the San Jose Sharks over the Edmonton Oilers. These two teams meet one last time in the Sharks' second to last game of the year. So the first period for the Sharks was, as usual, quite dominant for themselves. They managed to get 2 goals in that first, one from LeBanc and one from Evander Kane. That's Evander Kane's 24th goal of the season. Come second period, it's a bit less great. I think the Oilers actually had a pretty solid second period. They might have even been a slightly better team than the Sharks in the second period, but again, that is somewhat to be expected. Sadly, the Sharks' second periods, even during this winning streak, haven't been that great, but they did still exchange goals, one for LeBanc as well as one with Nugent Hopkins. Come third period, though, the Sharks took back control. They get another goal from LeBanc, giving him his first career hat trick, as well as a goal from Tomas Hertl, putting his goal total up to 25, as both Hertl and Kane begin to close in on goal-scoring leader on the Sharks, Joe Pavelski. And then the Oilers get a goal from Zach Cashin, a bit too little too late, and the Sharks get the 5-2 victory. First thing to talk about is Aaron Dell, as he started this game over Martin Jones, and Dell actually had a pretty solid game for himself. It wasn't the toughest game that he's probably ever had, but it was a good confidence booster for Aaron Dell, who's been having a pretty rough season thus far. So he gets a game here against a weaker Oilers team than some of the other matchups he's had this season. He gives up only 2 goals, 2 goals where he didn't really have much of a chance on. And so it's again a game the Sharks only give up 2 or less. The Sharks have some sort of crazy record when they give up 2 or less goals in a game. I think they're 23-0-0, the only team who is completely undefeated in games in which they give up 2 or less goals, because of the fact that the Sharks offense has been really just so good this season. But Aaron Dell has a solid game for himself. Next is Evander Kane, who I've been saying so many times that I've mentioned Kane when he's been getting these points, is that Kane, extends his hot streak. But at a point, you do have to stop calling it a hot streak and just start calling it maybe the norm for Evander Kane. I mean, now I believe he has 29 points in his last 23 games, so over a point per game pace in almost half the season. If you extend that to 27 games, he has 31 points, which is also very close to half the season. And so Evander Kane at this point, he's just playing some very, very good hockey. It seems like this might be just to be expected from Evander Kane from this point forward. He plays a ton of minutes here tonight because of the fact that Melker Karlsson goes down with an injury very early on in the first period on basically just his second shift. So Evander Kane ends up double shifting a good amount of time on the fourth line, so he plays close to 24 minutes, and again he puts up 2 points here in this one, and he's just been so good for the San Jose Sharks, one of their better forwards thus far during these past couple of months, I guess I could say, since the start of December, when the Sharks really started to turn their season around. And it's no surprise that the Sharks turning their season around sort of coincided with Evander Kane turning his season around, because his start in the first couple of months left a bit to be desired. Next is Timo Meier, who gets an assist tonight, but the reason I wanted to talk about him mostly is because it just seems as though Timo Meier can't really buy a goal at all. He had a very good chance onto Talbot, big save by Talbot. He also then hits the crossbar on one shot. Just Meier seems like he's snake bitten at this point. And the good news, I've mentioned this in the previous video before, is that Meier does continue to actually get points here and there. Now he's played 4 games after the break. I believe he only has 2 points in those 4 games, both assists, of course, but it's still actually a decent stretch points-wise, just not goals-wise, which is what you are hoping from out of Timo Meier. But again, he's just getting extremely unlucky when it comes to some of these shots. I feel as though he's so close to just breaking through. I thought it might happen after he got that goal against the Florida Panthers. It didn't end up being the case, but I feel like maybe just one more goal could push him over the limit, because he actually has been playing some solid hockey as of late. It just really hasn't been going his way thus far. Next is Radim Shemek, and he didn't necessarily stand out, but I thought he had a very good defensive game, and the reason I wanted to mention him is because Shemek has taken an interesting trajectory so far during the season. And when he first came into the lineup, over Joachim Ryan, over Tim Heed, people were wondering if, he would be able to actually play more than a single game, and he was very impressive during his first few games. He managed to solidify a spot in the lineup. I thought after his first maybe dozen games, the magic sort of started to fall off. I thought Shemek had some pretty rocky games through that middle part of his season thus far, but I think after the All-Star break especially, he has really picked up his pace. I thought he looked very good tonight. I thought he looked very good against the Calgary Flames the other night, and Shemek seems to be back to that form he was at earlier on, and I guess you could say his NHL career, which was earlier on this season. And I think Shemek, he's not a young player. He's still something like 25 or 26, even if he is considered a rookie at the NHL level, but I think he has sort of learned with the fact that the NHL season is a grind, and you have to try and put in your best effort as possible every single night, because you don't want to be a liability. And there were at times this season, Shemek has been very good all around, but there were times this season where he was sometimes a liability while on the ice, and I think Shemek will have learned from those experiences, and it's pretty clear that he has, to perform better as we go on into the future. Finally, who I have to talk about has to be Kevin Labanc. In my trade deadline video, I said that if the Sharks were going to make a trade for a scoring winger, and I felt as though the Sharks would probably, just based on what Doug Wilson has said, Kevin Labanc would be the biggest possible asset that the Sharks could trade, because they don't have any first-round picks. Well, Kevin Labanc is either increasing his trade value or is increasing Doug Wilson's decision-making process, where it's going to make it harder to actually unload number 62, because he gets his first career NHL hat trick here tonight. Very good game from him. He's actually been quite good since after the All-Star break. I said leading up to the All-Star break, he was going to have some good games to really reassure the San Jose Sharks, and that didn't end up happening those last few games before. But now we're about less than a month to go, less than just like a couple weeks actually, until the trade deadline, and Labanc is making it so that the Sharks are going to have to think twice of whether or not they want to trade him away, or whether or not they even want to pick up a scoring winger in general. What I thought was very interesting about Labanc here tonight was that on his goals there really wasn't much celebration, and we saw that sometimes out of like Evander Kane, where he really didn't give it his all there in the celebrations. But Kevin Labanc is a pretty young forward, and especially on his hat trick, he gave like a small fist pump, but there really wasn't much outward excitement. So I wonder if that's just because maybe he's not as proud of his game and where it is at the moment, or where it has been this season, I guess you could say, so he doesn't really feel the outward joy. Or maybe, as we know, DeBoer and Doug Wilson maybe gave sort of Labanc a talk, maybe possibly during the All-Star break, of you have to show something in these last 30 games to show that you can be a consistent forward. And maybe that's sort of hanging around in the mind of Kevin Labanc as being sort of like you could potentially be traded, you could potentially be out of San Jose, which would be a big tragedy right now with the Sharks rolling as well as they are. If Kevin Labanc ends up going to a team, especially if the Sharks are to pick up a scoring winger, he'd be going to a team that is missing the playoffs. So that would be pretty bad, pretty sad in general for him. And so he's certainly going to try and play as well as he possibly can here down the stretch to show Doug Wilson that he could be a reliable forward in the playoffs, because it's going to be a reason why you pick up a scoring forward to go into the playoffs, is because you want someone who can reliably score. And earlier on in the season, it didn't seem like Kevin Labanc was that player, and I'm still not 100% convinced that he is. We'll see how he does during these next few games, because it's going to be very important, not just for Labanc's season, but for Labanc's career at this point, because if he can't show something in these last couple of weeks as he did tonight here with this hat trick, he could be on the way out of San Jose. It'll be very interesting to see what does indeed happen, but Labanc certainly seems like he knows that is a big possibility. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Monday. They'll face off in their final game of the road trip against the Vancouver Canucks, who have actually been pretty good as of late. They actually just defeated the Calgary Flames here tonight in a shootout. And so they are looking like a pretty dangerous team, trying to make a push for a potential wildcard spot with how the West is sort of like faltering so far this season. Many teams are in the race for the wildcard spot, but Vancouver, the Canucks, are actually near the top of that, so they could potentially make it in a season where not many people expected. So the Canucks are going to have a lot of motivation. The Sharks are going to have to be ready to handle that if they want to get the 2 points. Class dismissed.